Welcome to Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf. Today, our special guest is Jay Amberg. He is a retired Glenbrook South teacher, author of 11 books, and a founding partner of Amiga Press. Welcome, Jay.
Hi, Yvonne. How are you?
Good. And how was teaching at Glenbrook South for 16 years?
I love teaching at Glenbrook South. I had taught at another school for 16 years before that, and went to Glenbrook South and found very much a sense of community there. The students were involved in activities, and the school really promoted getting students involved. I taught a couple of strange classes. One was a combined math and English course for accelerated freshmen. I also taught in the Glenbrook Academy for a number of years, so my experiences there were all really good.
I find the students there very open and enthusiastic.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, and the teachers and administration also, it was my experience at that time, was that everyone really was working together to make it all work well, and that was fun to be part of.
That is. Now, you are an author of 11 books. Now, did you start writing while you were at Glenbrook South, or was this something you got into after you retired?
No, I started actually before Glenbrook South.
Oh,
I had finished a doctorate at Northwestern, and then I wanted to continue writing, and I wrote 70-some articles for magazines with names like Writing and Current Media and things like that. And I wrote a novel that wasn't published, and then wrote a couple of nonfiction books, again with exciting names like Study Skills Handbook and Creative Writing Handbook and Prep for the SAT and that sort of thing.
But those aren't easy to write, though. I feel like how-to books for something creative is almost an oxymoron. I mean,
it's what it taught me was sitting down and getting the work done.
Being organized?
Both the magazine, both the magazine writing and the book writing, the nonfiction, got me into the habit of, when I wasn't teaching, to write. And so summers, vacations, I would very much immerse myself in writing, and it flowed pretty well. I never really suffered from writer's block because I never had time to suffer from writer's block. I was heading into it always, and that was great.
And I think it's very interesting to think about writing as a habit. We've had other guests who talk about that, and people who are, let's say, technical writers, copywriters, who you don't really associate with creative writers. You think they're two different type of writers, but you need both, don't you? I mean, you have to be organized.
You've got to have if you don't sit down to it, it won't get done. For me, the difference is having more time for the imaginative stuff to bubble up. It's always in the back of my mind, but to have characters and scenes become real to me takes time. Whereas with the, say, the Study Skills Handbook, I knew that I was doing a chapter on research, how to do research. So I didn't have to be able to let it happen. I just made it happen. But with the
focus on the points and
with the creative stuff, it's more a matter of finding it and then letting the characters come alive for me. And it sounds a little bit strange. Excuse me. It sounds a little bit strange, but they do very much come alive to me. And once they come alive, then it's just a matter of my trying to manage them.
So yes. Do you? So when you write you wrote a thriller, right?
Yeah, I've written a number of thrillers now.
And Bone Box is your newest.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the idea for Bone Box was sort of most of the thrillers I've done are what if What if something happened? And what occurred here was that what if an archaeological discovery was made that would sort of change our understanding of Western history, of European and American history. And I learned that at some point, and this is generally accepted as true, that the mother of Jesus of Nazareth and John the Apostle fled Jerusalem and went to Asia Minor, which is now Turkey.
Yes.
And sort of lived out their lives near the city of Ephesus, which was a very powerful Roman city in Asia Minor at that time. And so I just thought, well, what if something were discovered related to them and also related to Jesus of Nazareth that would sort of cause people to very much want what that was,
Yes.
or very much not want anyone to know what that was. And the mystery came out of that.
Wow.
And that's the way they've tended to work. But I went to Turkey originally to just research a little bit of the settings. There's the ruins of a cathedral, an early cathedral, outside of the city of Selçuk. The Roman city, Ephesus, the ruins are right outside the same town in another direction. And I got there, and well, I went to Istanbul first, and that was wonderfully interesting. And then I went.
When was your first trip? I mean,
It was earlier on. It was about 2002.
Okay, yeah.
So the Istanbul scenes, I knew I needed a couple of scenes there, and then I needed a couple of scenes out at Aysalak Hill, which is where the ruins of the cathedral are, and other things. And the people were so nice, the place was so interesting that I sort of fell in love with it. But then the last part of that trip, I went to an area of Turkey called Cappadocia, and that just blew me away.
So far, I mean, your journey, it sounds very exciting to go somewhere so far. And did you have any, you know anything about Turkey or contacts there, or you just...
No, not really. But,
oh my goodness, that sounds like a very big step to take, yeah.
When I started writing fiction, part of it was to go places that interested me,
yes,
and see how the story developed. And so I have one book set in the Florida Keys. That was fun research.
Yes.
Part of another book is set in London, so I got to spend time in London doing research. And I have the ideas for the story ahead of time, but then I go to the places and I find out, for example, in London I had characters walking from one place to another, so I just trailed where they would walk, and in fact you can't get through anymore. So the map I had was outdated, so it was nice to find out that I had to have the characters go a different way. And
and also the landmarks on the way, you want to make it real,
yeah.
and you describe those, right?
There's a nice bit in that particular book about London Bridge and the Tower of London, so I got to go there. There's a British naval vessel that the premise for that book was that during World War II a ship was sunk north of Russia that contained a cargo, and people thought it was gold, so they wanted to find it. And the sister ship, the exact same ship, is now British Naval Museum. So I got to actually go aboard the ship that was identical to the one that sank, and spend a couple of days just wandering around and seeing where scenes were. And that,
yeah, that's that's like a writer's dream.
It was. It's funny because what I do wouldn't seem very exciting to people. It's tremendously exciting to me.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's...
In Turkey, for example, in Cappadocia, there's a number of cave churches.
Yes.
And so I visited those, and I thought about where scenes were. But then I spent a day just wandering around in the hills and found cave dwellings that really no one had been in 1,000 years. And that was amazing to me.
When I was in Petra, and Jordan,
Right.
we also visit some of these caves, and it's just surprising to me that you're walking on these paths and there's broken terracotta
Right.
just everywhere,
Yeah.
strewn everywhere, and it's very exciting to
Yeah.
think that other people, lived here, threw away their trash
Right.
here, right? Just like, some.
And you understand well then why it's exciting for me, but to say to
Yes.
someone, well, I spent a day just wandering around and crawling into caves.
Yes.
But people lived there 1,000 years
Yes.
before, and the frescoes are still on the wall, and they're not in good shape, but they're there.
Yes.
And that was very,
yeah,
very fun.
You can see remnants of
Right.
what they did there, or
What their lives were
goes
like.
on. Yes, and that's extremely fascinating. I think it's like going back in time, right? As
Yeah,
close as you
and
can.
in that case of the Bone Box, that particular book, originally the story was going to be about 1/3 in Turkey, and the whole story landed up being in Turkey because I found, for me, such tremendously interesting places to have the characters act out what was going to happen.
Yes. Well, and these themes make me think of Indiana Jones, as other authors, other
Yeah.
your readers have mentioned, and I also think about National Treasure, which is the connection between America and the European history.
Some sort of treasure
Yes.
features in all of the thrillers that I've written because people are interested in treasure, and the treasure doesn't always turn out to be what people want it to be.
Right. Yes, true. And
when I was researching the Key West book, there had been a spectacular find of Spanish gold, and I went down to Key West and got aboard one of the boats and worked with one of the captains that had found the gold.
Yes.
So it's very exciting to see both what it was like aboard a Spanish galleon, but also what it was like for the treasure hunters. And that discovery was so big that it actually ruined a number of their lives. They went from being these obsessed treasure hunters to being these independently wealthy people who had nothing to do. And it didn't,
yes.
everyone got rich, but they didn't necessarily improve their lives.
Yes.
It's sort of like lottery winners.
Right.
And so
and probably take much longer than they expected to do, right?
Yeah,
And
in the case of the Key West story, it was 7 years from the time they started looking to the time they found it. And one of the sons of the main guy died in a diving accident.
Wow.
So
See,
you've got all this human stuff happening, and
and the price of which you
Right.
probably never thought
the
would
human
be.
price is,
Yes.
and that's really in all the stories also, is the when the characters come alive for me, the price they pay for whatever they're doing, the price they're willing to pay, and what they discover about themselves and what we discover about them and about ourselves really is what the stories are about.
And it's not really rational. If you let
No,
them,
no, it's
right?
not.
It's not because
It's
you
not
gotta
sequential.
think about it. Oh, okay.
The people that are very good at discovering treasure have a rational, sequential way about them,
Yeah.
but it's almost always a leap at some point.
Right,
You
right.
get you A, B, C, purple.
Yeah. And they seem, well, perhaps, your experience also shows that once they committed to maybe the idea, almost like you can't stop buying lottery tickets. You just, you miss out.
The characters are invariably obsessive. And that's what both helps them out, but also makes them more human, because they may not be able to see something else that their lives would be better if they could see.
And we all do that.
Yeah,
we all do that, right?
Yeah.
And then the gold they find, I heard, I've seen in field museums and National Geographic stories, that they're often not what looks like gold, right? They're completely calcified, perhaps, or
Yeah, the
they're
gold doesn't so much calcify, but
or
that's one of the interesting things about the gold. The gold
really
stays gold.
amazing.
Silver can a little bit, but a lot of the other artifacts are completely encrusted.
Yes.
But I think one of the allures of gold is that it stays gold.
Yeah, it's unchanged. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what is the name of that book, that Treasure Hunter in Key West? Because I would love to read that.
The name of the book is Doubloon, which is the Spanish gold coin that they were
Yes.
seeking and found so much of. And
That is a
yeah,
one-word title. That
one word,
that
doubloon,
will,
and
that would define it all, isn't
yeah,
it?
that was why it got that title.
Oh,
So.
I like that. So, how did you decide to found a press, Amiga Press? How did that opportunity come about?
It came about in two ways. I had an agent, New York agent, and the first couple of thrillers I wrote were published by very good New York houses, Warner's, and so I had good experiences with that. But what I learned is that the ground was shifting and starting to shift, and it has much more now, so that unless the writer is making $1 million, the writer's book isn't going to be promoted much. So I landed up doing a lot of my own promotion, which was fine. But then it occurred to me that the royalties
Don't reflect the work you put in.
Exactly.
Yes.
That, and not that it needed to, but what caused me immediately to start the press was that I had an idea for a poetry book for men.
Yes, I saw that. 52 poems.
52
for
poems
right?
for men. I didn't write any of them. It's Robert Frost and E.E.
Okay.
Cummings and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But
Selection. Yeah.
nobody could, no publisher would take a chance on that.
Oh.
And it was a project I really wanted to do because I was an English teacher,
Yes.
and people periodically, male people,
Right.
asked me, you know, what poems are there for men? And I was like,
Yes.
well, there aren't.
Yeah.
So producing that book it allowed me, or forced me, to start Amiga Press. And then a couple of years later, I had an idea for a book, or I actually had a book that was told from a whale's perspective.
Okay.
You know, we've
Yes,
talked a little
yes,
bit about
persona,
characters and voices, and
Yes.
in some ways that was the most interesting experience writing for me, because I thought it would take me about a year to figure out the voice that I wanted to
Yes.
write it in.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
But it came very quickly. And I found that I just needed to sit down and let the whale speak through me, which is, I realize, a weird thing to say. But
Not at all. We all have our inner animal,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and
Alter-
apparently
yeah.
the whale
Alter
was
ego.
for me. But my agent said to me, and he was right, there's no shelf for this. You know, so I put it away for a little bit, and then I thought, wait, I am learning how to do this. So I put that out, and then
Well, it's interesting the genres and types that is also preset, you know, for
Right.
large
and that-
publishers.
And that's what's changed, is that it used to be that a book had a shelf life that was very short, so there was a big splash and then the book disappeared. And now books are selling very differently, in that there may not be as big a splash, but the book keeps selling.
I
We did a book about 5 years ago, a local guy, a Glenview guy, actually, as a matter of fact.
Is it a campaign? Or?
No, it's not Peter Nolan. We did Peter
yes,
Nolan's
Peter, yes.
campaign also, but this was a book about baseball in the 1950s. And it sold okay then, but I was having lunch with him the other day, and he said he had just gotten an order for 80 more copies from somebody, so that books don't vanish the way they used to.
That's interesting, because you think with our world going so fast now that they almost vanish faster
Yeah,
on screen, right?
They
But
vanish, but they don't vanish from the websites. They don't vanish from Amazon.
I see.
So the life of a book is very different now than what it was when we started out.
Yes, that's
And with Amiga Press, it was a matter of finding authors. Peter Nolan's a good example of it, who had the book accepted by a university press, but the process was going to take 3 years to publish it. You go
Right.
through committees, all of that sort of
Yeah.
thing. And so he came to us and said, well, you know, what about this? And we said, yeah, it'll take about 8 months, and we can get it out.
It's
And he wanted to get it
unbelievable.
out, and that was, campaign is about the Herald Washington, and were reasons to get the book out at that time. And
Yeah, we've had him on our program
yeah,
too.
and
Yes.
that's become sort of the model, is books that would be accepted or have been accepted at large presses, but there's not going to be any real movement to get the book out.
Yes.
And so we found sort of a niche there, and it's mostly Chicago area publishers. We have a couple that don't live here, but
I think that's, well, when you talked about poetry, I thought that's very interesting, because I've actually come across poems for women and poems for different single women, women who are mothers, so, and I don't really understand, really, from my cultural perspective, my Chinese background, that there's nothing feminine about poetry,
No.
and there's a lot of historic poets who are male, and I don't know how there is no, there's no market, or there's no need somehow, for a poetry book for men.
That book did all right. Interestingly to me, it was mostly women buying it to give to men who they thought should read poetry. It wasn't men going into the bookstores and buying it. It was a matter of people finding the book, and it did well as a gift for men, but men weren't going out to look for them.
Yes, even though you have had people ask you about it. Right?
Oh, sure, and that's another good example of a book that's had a long life. Some copies sell every year. Same thing with books like the Creative Writing Handbook and the Study Skills Handbook, is that those books 15 years later are still selling. So they haven't vanished. And that's really part of how the publishing has changed so much, is that books don't go out of print anymore. So we'll see.
That's actually a good news for our writers.
Yes, it is. It's good for writers to know.
So you are now going back to Turkey, and can you tell us a little bit more? What are you doing there?
What I'm doing in Turkey is teaching teachers to teach English. I'm working for a K-12 school in Izmir, which is a city most people here haven't heard of, but it's the third largest city in Turkey after Istanbul and Ankara. And it's on the Aegean Sea. It's directly south of Bulgaria. So it's south and west of Istanbul.
So you had a nice weather. You have the nice weather, right?
Yes, it's like researching a book in the Florida Keys. It's like, oh yeah. The weather is very nice, and I'm heading back in another week and spending the latter part of January and February there as opposed to here is very enticing.
I've been to Bulgaria too.
And this, if you go directly south,
the Black Sea.
And then through the Aegean, you'll land up in Izmir. So it's south of Europe, but it's Asia.
It's very interesting, isn't that part? Don't you find the people there, the way they look is very interesting too?
Yeah,
because they are between two continents.
Yeah, Izmir, which is the third largest city in Turkey after Ankara and Istanbul, was the ancient Smyrna, and it is the southwest part of Turkey, and it's been very much the port of entry for Asia into the Mediterranean. So there's an incredibly mixed genetic background of the people. And one of the things I like best about the people is that they're really very much open to the world.
Well, that's interesting because I stopped in Istanbul once, for transfer. I think that in that 3 hours, I saw such amazingly different
Right.
people. People who look Russian, people who
Right.
look like me, and then
Yeah.
people who look much more closer to a Mediterranean look, and they all
Yeah,
are making that transfer.
there's no, to me, having been in Turkey a number of times now, there's no Turkish look.
Yes,
The way people sometimes type, oh, they look like this.
Right.
There isn't really
Well,
that.
how fascinating, isn't it?
It's been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you, Jay, for being on our program.
Thank you. It's been great being here.
And thank you for watching and join us next time on Off the Shelf.